My in-laws joked about me sleeping with my infertile husband's twin to get pregnant. Turns out they weren't joking. Andrew and I had been trying to get pregnant for 2 years with no success. His identical twin brother Brett had 3 kids from 3 different women, and none of them were planned. He didn't pay child support for any of them and bragged about it. My mother-in-law thought this was hilarious and brought it up constantly. The first time she made the joke was at a family barbecue. She said, "You know, Brett's clearly got good swimmers. Maybe you should just borrow him for a night." Everyone laughed and I forced a smile. Andrew said, "Mom, that's not funny." She waved him off and said, "Oh, I'm just kidding. You two are so sensitive." At Thanksgiving, she said, "You know, if you did use Brett's sperm, the baby would look the same anyway since they're identical." I said no and explained that Brett was a deadbeat who didn't take care of the kids he already had. She said, "But you'd be raising this one. It would be different." At Christmas, his dad said, "Brett's sperm donation could be his gift to you. He's got plenty to spare." Brett laughed and said, "Yeah, I'm like a one-man fertility clinic." I said I wasn't comfortable with that, and Brett said, "Your loss. I make cute kids." Andrew would tell them to stop, but they'd just laugh it off. After our 3rd round of IVF failed, Andrew's mom called and said, "I really think you should consider using Brett. You could do it the medical way if that makes you more comfortable." I said absolutely not. She said, "Why? Genetically, it's the same thing." I said, "Because Brett isn't my husband, because I didn't want to tell her, because Brett's gross." I told Andrew about the call, and he said, "I'll talk to her. She's crossing a line." 2 weeks later at dinner at his parents' house, his mom cornered me in the kitchen and said, "I talked to Brett and he's willing to help however you need." I said, "I don't want his help. Andrew and I are handling this ourselves." She said, "You're being stubborn. You say you want a baby, but you won't accept a perfectly good solution." After dinner, Andrew's dad pulled me aside and said, "Back in the old days, families helped each other out this way all the time. It's not as weird as you're making it." I told Andrew in the car that his family was getting worse, and he said, "I know, I'm sorry, I'll handle it." The next family gathering I didn't go to. Andrew went alone and came back saying he'd laid down the law and told everyone to drop it completely. He said they finally understood and promised it wouldn't come up again. A month later, Andrew suggested we try unassisted one more time before considering other options. He'd been stressed about work, and we hadn't been intimate in weeks. He said, "Let's just try to relax and not overthink it." We started kissing, and something felt wrong. The way he touched me was different. His hands moved differently than Andrew's did. The rhythm was wrong. I pulled back and said, "Andrew?" He didn't answer right away, and I felt my stomach drop. I sat up and looked at him and said, "You're not Andrew." Brett smiled and said, "Took you long enough to notice." I screamed and jumped out of bed. Brett sat there looking smug and said, "Relax. Your husband knows exactly where I am." I felt the room spin. I grabbed my robe and said, "What?" Brett stood up and started getting dressed like this was completely normal. He said, "Andrew's downstairs. We planned this together." Well, the whole family did, really. I ran downstairs holding onto the wall because my legs felt weak. Andrew was sitting on the couch with his parents. When he saw me, he stood up and I saw guilt flash across his face. I said, "Tell me you didn't know. Tell me Brett's lying." Andrew opened his mouth and closed it. His mom stood up and said, "Honey, we were trying to help you." I looked at Andrew and said, "You knew? You planned this?" He said, "Let me explain." I said, "You let your brother get in our bed. You let him touch me. You watched him go upstairs." Andrew said, "You wanted to get pregnant. I knew you'd say no if we asked again, so this was the only way to help you." I backed away from him and said, "Help me? You violated me." His mom said, "You're being dramatic. It's not like Brett's a stranger. He's family, and you didn't even notice the difference." Brett came downstairs and said, "Yeah, and now you might actually get pregnant. You're welcome." I stared at Andrew and said, "You stood down here and waited while your brother pretended to be you, while he was in our bed." Andrew said, "I did it for us, for the baby you wanted." I said, "I wanted a baby with you, not with him, and I wanted a husband I could trust." His dad said, "You didn't even notice for a while. What's the harm?" Brett said, "Honestly, I did you a favor." Andrew's clearly shooting blanks. Andrew reached for me and said, "Please, just think about it. If it works, you'll have the baby you wanted." I left that night and filed for divorce. They still don't understand why I'm upset. His mom called me ungrateful for not accepting her help.